Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our ongoing study in Moral Laws by Edgar Sheffield Brightman, dated 1933. We're going to take a look at pages 125 to 156. We're going to take up Axio-Logical law and the principles that it does abbreviate. Let's begin with block 1. We take a look at Axio-Logical law. We are to choose values that are self-consistent, harmonious, and coherent. Formal law abbreviated the principles of choice. Axiological law abbreviates the principles of value through the enlistment of rational intelligence. Now we get into the positing of principles of value. In note 2, we take up a teleological point of view. We take up an eschatological evaluation of empirical experience. We work out an application of value, a practical application of our value model. Our first two principles that are abbreviated under axiological law are the principle of consequence and the principle of best possible means. Those are the first two conceptual principles that are abbreviated under the categorical axiological law. And axiological is also an objective realization. We have three additional principles that are abbreviated. We've got the principle of specification, the principle of most inclusive end, and the principle of ideal control. We take up critical interpretation and rational construction. Remember, that's part of his logic of faith, interpretive construction. So our subjective formal law is going to become objectively posited toward realization. We reach that realm of positing. With axiological law, we reach that realm of positing. We'll take a look at note 4, the axiological as objective realization. We seek actuality to verify our ideals by enlisting the principle of reason. We take up the rational selection of possibly realized values, and we go out of the self in praxis to achieve objective value. So we are setting up the first stage of praxis, which means you must posit the real that you want to actualize first. We want to achieve the actualization of objective value. There is a return moment. All ideal values are gained out of empirical values in the return out of praxis. There will be a return out of praxis with additional learning, additional insight. In other words, epistemology is interrelated with missiology. There is a learning in the return moment out of praxis that causes us to revise our idealistic system of value, which essentially makes up our subjective state of mind. And then we're ready to begin the dialectic all over again. So that gives us axiological law. It's that move out of the formal subjective into the realm of positing, and positing is positing the internal externality, that filter through which we view all of reality, that filter through which we act in actuality. So it's a window of filter for all of our language and all of our action. That's called the realm of positing. We put it at the forefront of our mind as that view of the kingdom that interprets our view of reality. So we begin by understanding the category. Before we look at the abbreviated conceptual principles, we have first of all looked at the category of axiological law. Now, under this category of axiological law, next we want to go to block 2 and take a look at it as system. We're positing a system, value as system. We begin with value and association. No single value can stand on its own. There must be a coherent system of value. The abbreviated principles become those values of association. They are associated with the categorical axiological law. Intrinsic values of beauty, reason, and religion are all interrelated. And next we take a look at instrumentality in Note 2. Any value that causes intrinsic value is instrumental. And Brightman says that there are natural instrumental values. Those are the aspects in empirical creation that reveal tendencies or possibilities for value. We check those nodal points, those entrance points of tendency, before we take up our praxis ministry. It is the free goods of nature. It is that which engenders in itself in our conscious mind. We are triggered in the conscious self when we encounter tendencies toward kingdom in our experience. Through spiritual perception, we perceive these tendencies that are asking for our participation, these events that are crying out with birth pangs of needing to be realized as objective kingdom of God. And so we look at this implementation of axiological law as an instrumental act. We are instrumentally bringing forth kingdom. Now there are also economic instrumental values, and that is our outgoing economic moral praxis, that which is organically connected to intrinsic value. And Brightman also wants to talk about the aspect of highest pleasure. Faith enters in here. Faithful obedience or moral loyalty enters here. Axiological law necessitates our obedient faith response. Obey moral law. By obeying moral law, that yields the highest true pleasure, and that means to find the true meaning of life. So going out of the self is a faith response, and that's why Brightman calls it the logic of faith, the 3 steps of the logic of faith. Remember, experimental positing, outgoing desire, and interpretive construction. Faith is a movement. Faith is not belief. For Brightman, faith is a movement of spirit from the side of the human being, of the disciple. Faith is a movement. It is experimental positing, outgoing desire, and interpretive construction. We enter into that faith response in order to bring about the true meaning of life and reach the highest pleasure. So we have looked at the category. We have examined the category of axiological law. We have examined the category of axiological law as system. The primary principle that it abbreviates is the principle of consequence. So block 3 is going to take a look at the first abbreviated conceptual principle, and it's going to be the principle of consequence. So if you look at the law of consequence, remember when we say law of consequence, it's a subsystem abbreviated under the category. Okay, we're looking at concepts now. The category is axiological law. The concepts are being those which are abbreviated under the category. The law of consequence, the self must approve all foreseeable consequences of praxis action, acting out of our eschatological perspective. We participate in the dynamic stream of spiritual consciousness. God is personalistic. God is personal consciousness. Our system of categorical laws abbreviates a subsystem of conceptual principles. That's key for understanding this entire book. Our system of categorical laws abbreviates a subsystem of conceptual principles. That requires the self to possess an intelligible standard to judge consequences, and that standard is the logic of faith, which includes formal law, axiological law, and personalistic law. There are your 3 categories. Those are the 3 categories. They abbreviate all of the subsystem principles. Now under Note 2, an important thing to be understood from Brightman, consequence represents a virtual flow. We act out of intelligible insight in accordance with our ideal sign model. Through our desire of practice, we seek to confirm our moral insights. We employ all the social sciences to assist in this task: sociology, psychology, anthropology, everything. Our posited practical act creates a virtual flow of tendencies that can create unforeseen consequences. So, language has power. Language has power, the power to create. Our posited model of the kingdom of God creates a virtual force, a virtual flowing force of tendency that creates the consequences of our praxis. And praxis is action and reflection within a particular situation. That's the definition. Praxis is action and reflection in a particular historical situation. That's the definition of praxis. It includes interpretation. It includes return moment. It includes construction. That's why Brightman calls it interpretive construction. So after this, realizing that we do have the three categories, and that we do create a virtual flow of the force of spirit through positing, now we look at note 3 and we take up consequence as becoming an axiological consideration. Our praxis must aim at consistent value. The social mindset oftentimes posits a disregard for consequences. Live for today, forget about tomorrow. That creates a negative force to emerge. Christ taught that ultimate consequences are significant in his parable of the wheat and the tares. Hebrews chapter 11 is a study in the law of consequence, says Brightman. And Brightman says a noble faith will risk all to attain the highest ideal. An ignoble faith has a blind disregard for consequence, and that is egoism. That is self-centered egoism. If you don't care about the consequences that might affect others, that's pure egoistic perspective. Now, consequence is both objective and subjective. Remember, we got the return moment. Objectively, it is the end results of praxis and actuality. Subjectively, it is our intentionality, our character, that is changed in the return moment. It becomes revised in the return moment. Therefore, there is an obligation to be well informed prior to praxis. And then we look under eschatological aim and its negative considerations. Brightman says inaction can be irresponsible and sinful, and silence with regard to the spoken word of the gospel and its power, silence can also become a sinful position to take. So inaction and silence can become problematic and become sin. Unintended consequence can occur, but we're still responsible for any unintended consequence because it is our action. But Brightman says after considering this principle of consequence, we are now ready to transition to the next abbreviated principle, the principle of best possible means. So we've looked at the category, and we've looked at the first principle abbreviated under the category. And the next lesson is going to take up the principle of best possible means. The key point to really learn here, though, in this lesson, the key point to learn is that Brightman is proposing a system of moral laws that consists of three categorical moral laws. And those are the three basic formal law, axiological law, and personalistic law. And that becomes the categorical. But these categorical laws, the major headings of formal law, axiological law, and personalistic law, they all abbreviate the various steps of the system, the various stages of the system. And those stages of the system can never be dogmatic, so they are principles instead of dogmatic doctrine. They are principles. You've got category laws and you've got conceptual principles. That makes for a very open and dynamic living organism of spirit. When you leave it defined that way, it becomes a living organism, and Brightman says that's what it needs to be, not static dogmatism, but living organic spirit. And that means you have categorical laws and abbreviated conceptual tendencies. And the realm of positing is axiological law. We transition out of, remember the holistic model we looked at, you transition out of data and system to enter into axiological positing. Remember, you just leave system when you enter into axiological law, which is positing of the real, that realm of the positing of the real. It's a central area for Brightman because the real is the realm of transcendence. It's the realm of the spiritually real. And when we posit the spiritual real, we're saying that exists and is trying to be imprinted on sensate experience. We see reality as pregnant with a possibility of spiritual uplifting, spiritual imprinting. We see the kingdom where others don't see the kingdom. We see the kingdom. We see evidence of the spirit. We see evidence of tendencies toward kingdom. Those tendencies ask for our participation. We participate by taking up the category of axiological law. And that means we've got to pay attention to consequence. We've got to pay attention to consequence to properly and authentically posit our idealistic value system. That's going to wrap up pages 125 to 156, and we will pick up on page 157 next time.